Today I'm speaking with Becca Yeoman. Becca, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Tim. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So nice to meet you. And I don't know too much about Becca, so we're going to get to know her together today. But Becca has a bachelor's degree in accounting from Post University, and she's now a software developer. She lives in upstate New York, which I've traveled through there a few times. That's a beautiful part of the country. She is the mother of two, and her son has autism. She was raised in the Assemblies of God church, and her deconversion led her to a divorce from a Catholic husband. She loves to read, to research philosophy, neuroscience, and neurodiversity. And that's what I know about you so far. But Becca, if you could tell us more about yourself in terms of your bio and in any hobbies or fun things about yourself as well.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so I recently moved to upstate from Long Island as soon as my partner and I were approved to work remotely. And we were coming right out of the pandemic and the quarantine. So I really wanted to splurge on a big house in case I'm ever trapped in it with two small kids again for a whole year. So I got I have a pool. I like to go swimming or sit in the hot tub in the sauna. I also like to read a lot, and if I had the time to be able to leave the house, I would love to do kayaking and skiing and hiking are some hobbies I do rarely, but really enjoy.
Very cool. And what ages are your kids?
Lucas is just turned 5. He's the one who was diagnosed with moderate autism as well as severe apraxia of speech. And then my older daughter is Ava. She's 8 years old, and she's neurotypical, just excelling and doing great.
Very cool. It sounds like you've got a busy household like mine. Very there's always something going on.
Yeah, yeah, we're busy.
That's awesome. Well, as you know, we love to invite people to share their stories. If you could tell us how you got exposed to Christianity, I assume as a child, and how your relationship with the Lord evolved over the years, and I'll jump in with some questions.
Yeah, I was raised in the Assemblies of God. That was pretty consistent throughout my years growing up. I grew up here in Rochester. I had moved out when I was 18. I kind of had to leave the house, moved a bunch of different states, and found myself with the opportunity to move back recently, like I said, working remotely. So that's been interesting. I feel like it's kind of brought up a lot of feelings, and I'm sort of reprocessing the deconversion. I actually deconverted. I've been out for about 13 years. But like I said, it's just
Wow.
kind of coming back to me. And it's kind of amazing to think like, oh yeah, so for about a third of my life, I've actually been non-Christian. It feels like so much a part of my identity.
Yeah, that is very
Um,
cool.
yeah, yeah. So my earliest memory of the church was being in Sunday school. I must have been about 5 years old, and that was the day that I officially accepted Jesus in my heart. I remember a pastor and another kid about my age, and us both doing it, and feeling like it was really meaningful. And I definitely, for me to even be able to remember it, means it was, a big moment for me. But then I do remember also, like, I think maybe a few months after that, I was riding in the car with my parents back home from church. And I just remember having this insight, like thinking about the whole salvation message. It was like, I must have been like 6 years old. And I thought, Jesus died on the cross so that I don't have to go to hell because of my horrible sins. And my just initial reaction at that point was, I don't deserve to go to hell. He should have done, of course, he should do something to save us, And then, so that initial reaction sort of got pushed down. Um, but it's interesting for me to think about if I had just held on to it at that point and like didn't give in and just, persisted through my life, not, understanding that I don't, I was just born as a human. I'm doing the best I can. I don't deserve, some person to be, murdered brutally because of me.
Mm. It is
Um,
very astute to pick up on that at such a young age because so many of us just, swallowed the pill and said, yep, I believe that's true. And we're wicked and deserving of all that condemnation. So it's good that you at least, even though you didn't follow through yet at that point in your story, it's good that you at least had that. Was the indoctrination, compared to what you've heard from other people, was the indoctrination a little less intense? Is that why you picked up on that, or was it just your personality picking up on that didn't make sense?
I think it was my personality picking up. Yeah, and I think it had been decades since, it had been decades later that I ever had like really a thought like that again. I had thoroughly become immersed in, just the joy of the Holy Spirit and everything that they taught in at church. And I did have my brothers. So I had three brothers. Two of them actually, they never really fell for it. Like they never believed it. But still, my
Wow.
parents had us going to church. They had us going to church, 3 times a week. My dad was an elder. They had us in Bible quiz, memorizing the Bible, which is so funny because my younger brother, he did amazing. Like he was super good at it. He was like #1 in New York State. But he didn't believe, so he was just like going through. So they just kind of learned how to like do what my parents make them do, knowing they don't believe. But I definitely believed it. I did pretty well too. I memorized chapters of the Bible. We were fundamentalists, so really like the Bible was everything. I never based my faith on like how other people acted. Like the objective truth was the Bible. So I was really close to it. And later on, that kind of, I think, made it easier for me to break away, just because, I did have this source of truth and to refer to. Um,
Could I ask about your brothers for a second? You said
sure.
that they never believed, like, ever?
Well, I should say, I think I think my younger brother never believed, and my older
Okay.
brother was like, he was gung ho for a few until he was like 7 or 8. Now he studied the Bible. He soaked up the praise for, saying all the right Jesus things, and he played the violin, and he was just super smart. He's like brilliant. He ended up being like 5 years ahead in school.
Wow.
And now the darker side of this time period was that at home, we would go to church and do all of this and have that happy time and, just hours worshiping God and stuff. But at home, things were pretty traumatic. We did get some pressure, like from my dad. I'm an elder. I have to show that I'm able to manage a household well. So we kind of had to appear like we were happy and well put together. But my mom actually, we didn't know it. We didn't have the words for it at the time. But now I know she had schizoaffective disorder, which is unfortunately the negative sides of schizophrenia plus the negative sides of bipolar manic. Um, so it was just a really traumatic time at home, when we went at church. And I'm afraid my dad worked, he was a really great provider. He would go to work, 8 to 10 hours a day and come home. But then he would also go off to the church for a few hours, a few days a week, leaving us home with the kids, or with my mom home with us kids. And I sort of like feel like he should have been with us, like the church really came between him and taking care of us and making sure we were okay.
Hmm.
Um,
It's really
I just
sad.
have,
It's typical, but it's sad.
yeah, I just have like, a lot of memories of how my mom treated my brothers and me. She would be like, very often she would be suicidal. She went after I saw her like going after my dad with a knife. Um, just like, you know, to this day, I don't blame her one bit. Like, I totally see so clearly how it's her, you know, the mental illness was making her behave this way. But she would also, but yeah, it breaks my heart to think of, you know, what we went through as kids, but plus the pressure of, you know, but you have to appear okay rather than actually getting help. Um,
Mm,
and
that's crazy.
yeah, and the church, my dad, you know, I think of him as a victim of the church too, because he was like in this crazy position of having, you know, my mom got sick. She was, you know, she wasn't sick when they first met. They had 4 young kids. And then all of a sudden, when we're young, she comes down with schizoaffective disorder. You know, they moved from Ohio to upstate New York, so they didn't have any family or much of a social network. So I think the church
Mm.
kind of gave that to them. And my dad he didn't know how to help my mom.
Could I
She
ask,
was
did he
going
feel like that was going to threaten, or did it threaten his ability to stay an elder? Like, did he eventually have to step aside from his role, or was he able to maintain it?
He kept no, he maintained it. We did end up switching churches at one point. I'm not entirely sure why we did that, but I think my perspective at the time was that he wanted to be even closer to God and in a more intense church. So we moved to like a smaller Spencerport or a smaller AG church, and which means, you know, also like less boundaries, so more people prying into your life kind of thing. But yeah, Josh was he was really Christian, really believing until like 7. And then he would actually read the encyclopedia for fun. He would read all these science books. And he told me, he's like, you know, none of this is true. You know, God is like, he told me God is like a man with a magnifying glass, like with an ant farm, like looking down on us and just toying with us because of how conflicting our daily experiences were with, you know, what we were seeing at the church.
Yeah,
And
for sure. That's a very appropriate picture metaphor. I was going to say I relate to your brother a little bit. I was the same way with studying. I remember one Saturday as a teenager, I studied my dictionary, just a dictionary, but it was one of those big dictionaries that tells you like where a word came from, its etymology. I studied it for like 10 to 12 hours, just a dictionary. I was like, I
oh
loved it.
wow.
I loved to learn, so I can relate to him.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas I was told at church, the Bible's the answer to everything. You know, I didn't really read anything else.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and I would just spend a lot of time like quiet and trying not to upset the people around me, you know, my mom and my brothers. And in the church, so they would come over, the pastor would come over to perform exorcisms on my mom as she started to get mentally ill. Like we didn't really know what was going on. And I just remember like hiding in my bedroom and like listening to what was going on, and they would just be praying that, you know, there were evil spirits in my mom, and that, you know, just weeping, you need to repent for your sin, like, you know, like all of this is her fault.
Can I throw in a question there with it being real in terms of the called the demonic world that she was struggling with and the need for, God and his angels to intervene and make it different. But in terms of there's the broader picture of like God is real. Did you feel like you were able to start to develop a relationship with God where, like, even as a child, perhaps, where you were able to pray and talk to Him? And do you remember? I know it's a long time ago, but do you remember sensing like He's your literal, like your sky daddy? I know we use that colloquially now, but like He's actually your father, your loving father up in heaven, and He's looking down on you in love, and He cares about you. Like, did you feel like that was growing in your relationship with Christ, or how did that work for you personally?
Good question. I think when I was younger, like really in the midst of a lot of that trauma, um, he just wasn't there. Like it was like I just felt so alone. But so I didn't really feel like his presence until I got older, maybe preteen and teenager, then I just felt like he was with me. I prayed every day, and just gave me this joy of the Holy Spirit. And I had all these, great experiences. I would go to like retreats, and just they did a lot of like speaking in tongues. I even spoke in tongues and would dance, and it would be like just hours of worshiping God, and weeping to laughing to and dancing. And now I see it as like manufactured drama. Like it's just, and I didn't realize it at the time. I thought it was so real. um I felt like, I was really being saved from something terrible. But now I realized, like, what am I being saved from? Like I didn't need all of that. And I feel like it would have been much better to have just like stability. As
Yeah,
I
for
got,
sure.
yeah.
With
My partner now says like it's hard for me to even adjust to peace or stability. I feel I'm so used to like the ups and downs, the highs and the lows, and the black and white of
mm,
Assemblies of God Christianity.
well, between
But
your situation at home and at church, it's a lot of intensity, a lot of angst. In terms of just for again, kind of putting pins in your story, for groundwork. If you would have been asked by somebody back then, say in your early teen years to mid teen years, someone who said, it sounds like you have a relationship with God and it's personal, and you think you're going to heaven when you die. If someone said to you, I don't think I know God that way, I don't think I'm necessarily sure I'm going to heaven, what would you have told them at that point? Like if they said, in a simplistic sense, what is the gospel? How would you have explained the way that you were at peace with God at that point?
I would say just as long as just give your heart to Jesus, just love him, read the Bible to know what he wants you to do and do it. He knows your heart. As long as you love him,
Mm,
uh, you know, you'll be forgiven. And I would constantly, try to keep my heart right, like many times a day, like make sure my heart's in the right spot. And I would even pray, like, if I do anything in the future, please forgive me. I didn't mean it, just trying to secure that salvation. We
like
did
a
have, yeah, they
preemptive
had us going
forgiveness.
through a lot of heaven's gates and hell's flames. So I was like constantly confronted with the idea of going to hell.
So did you have, it sounds like you may have had messaging where you could lose your salvation. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, you could definitely backslide and lose it.
Wow. Did you ever feel like you had, obviously, apart from the deconversion, but before that time frame, did you feel like you had ever lost your salvation, or did you feel like you were pretty confident that you were going to go to heaven and that you were right with God?
I think I was pretty confident the whole time up until 26, when I finally said, I don't believe this. I just was confronted with the fact I didn't believe it anymore. Um, yeah, I was just really immersed in the Holy Spirit, and I really thought he was with me all the time. And I would turn to him for any decision that I made, which really leads to a lot of waiting,
Yeah.
just waiting and waiting. And what I love now is just being able to decide what I want to do and do it.
Hmm.
Um,
Going back to your story that you mentioned with your mom a second, did your dad and the pastors and people that were intervening in her situation, did they feel like, or did they ever describe it as like, we actually cast demons out of her? Did they get that specific about it?
yeah, yeah, we were taught to trust Jesus. It would be evil, it would be a sin to trust the doctors. The pastor even
Mm,
took my mom. I think for a little while, my dad was considering taking her to a psychiatrist to get real help. And the pastor brought her to the psychiatrist and said, she doesn't need your help anymore. She doesn't need your help. She's going to trust Jesus. So she was basically left unmedicated, untreated with us small kids at home. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
That's so heartbreaking.
and it would have been like such a different story, I think, if that hadn't happened. Um, I remember her. It was my younger brother's birthday, and she was getting manic, and she wanted to leave. She said, "I got to get out of here. I'm leaving you." Um, Caleb Caleb come with me is the youngest, but then the second youngest was his birthday, Adam, and he says, "Mom, I want to take me with you. I want to go with you." And she just says, "I don't want you," and takes Caleb, and she runs off to Canada. Was all, I'm overhearing all this really young, and it just broke my heart. I heard her tell Adam, "I don't want you," and on his birthday, and just that rejection just,
Mm.
really stuck in me. And then other things, she would do to my older brother and myself, things she would say. And it's just, we all would have turned out so much better had she been treated, and there'd been more stability and focus on our needs, but we weren't allowed to focus on ourselves. I wasn't allowed to focus on my feel. I never was like introspective. How do I feel right now? It was always about God. I'm bad, how can I be right for God?
Yeah. Did she actually take him to Canada then?
Yeah, she left for a few days. My dad called the cops. I didn't know she's constantly suicidal too, so I was thinking the worst, but it did
Mm.
somehow my dad, they found her and brought them back to the house.
That is heartbreaking. And too, just what you just said a minute ago about how you felt like you were, instead of focusing on like what your family needed or what you needed, is always what God needed. And I feel like that's been like a theme that comes across in different ways in different interviews, but we get so wrapped up in this God character, and we think of course he's so real to us. It's not like we're going through this question, even like, is he real, is he not? If he is real, I should do this. It's just like we just know, quote unquote, that he's real, and so we live that way. But it's always about pleasing him, and of course, like you said, apologizing for the sins. I'm so sorry I've offended you. And it's like when you get in that theology, everything we do is offensive. It says even the good things you do are offensive to God. So it's like you get wrapped up in this worm theology that just destroys your self-esteem, of course, and your autonomy. And you spend your days just wringing your hands thinking, why am I so bad? And why can't I make God happy? And yet you have this theology that's like strong of like, God isn't looking at your sin. He's looking at Christ. God is happy, or more accurately, he's satisfied with Christ. He's not trying to find satisfaction in your righteousness as a human. He is satisfied with you, but only because Christ's righteousness covers you. And he is seeing you as good enough, because it's not you anymore. It's Christ is good enough, is more than good enough. And therefore, because you're in Christ, you're rescued and you're redeemed. But even though that theology kind of feels good on certain levels, you still have all these messages and verses that talk about you are so wicked and you deserve such punishment. And even if you're immediately saying, yes, I'm wicked, but God did this, you're still hammering home, I am so wicked. And it's amazing what that does to you. And it's hard. It's one of the hardest things, I think, once you deconvert, to really pull those roots up and say, what the hell did this thing do to my psyche I mean, especially if you're in it for decades, which is, you feel like you're spending your whole life apologizing for just existing.
Right. Yeah, it was just heartbreaking when I realized, he wasn't there. Um, and I did have like a little window to peace and sanity when we would go visit my grandparents in Ohio on the farm. And at the time, well, my grandparents were decidedly anti-religious. Like they were really opposed to
Hmm.
she had been raised in the Catholic Church, so she was really against the Catholic Church for different reasons. And my grandpa, he was really into math and science, and he really bonded with my brother Josh. And I think maybe that's partly why he was able to not believe, because of his influence. Not that I don't think they ever told us like God isn't real, or our brand because we had like a different brand of Christianity, so they didn't really speak to that. But I remember that just being like the secular, like it felt so peaceful, like stable, and they were secular. So it was a nice out to at home where it was this intense relationship with the Holy Spirit, but making sure you're always right. Your heart is always right, and enduring the trauma and things that were going on. And at the different like church meetings and stuff, I felt like, like the youth group, the counselors, I felt like the other kids in my group just couldn't really understand, their concerns were so like minor compared to mine. Like, oh, my brother was suicidal and and, all this crazy stuff going on. We had to call the cops. And so I just kind of shoved everything down and never really felt like like I was getting healing for the trauma from the church. And then we were always supposed to be ready for like the rapture. Like this was this big thing. And I remember like being in the service and they say, you need to be prepared. And I was young. I was like maybe 8 or 9. A team of people could come in here right now with machine guns and point it to your head and say, do you believe in Jesus? And you better say yes, or you're going to go to hell for eternity. And it was just like not what I needed. I really needed something more calm and stabilizing and therapeutic. Like I just think if we did like more of a secular Buddhism would have been just so much better, teaching us how to like be able to handle the suffering, to embrace the suffering. And
You were like going where it's already bad, and they're telling you it's probably about to be a lot worse, and it's like
yeah,
the stuff of nightmares.
yeah. So now I had to worry about the rapture and the evil spirits everywhere, and my dad would come home with stories about because he's to this day just really believes it, and he had visions or things he said he saw that were demonic, and I would actually go with him street evangelizing once a week we'd go to the beach and just like witness to to poor people standing around and try
Did
to
you
get them to
did you
pray the
do it
sinner's
too?
prayer.
Did you do it too,
Yeah,
or just watch your dad?
yeah, mostly my dad. I was there like to spot him, and I think it helps him be more approachable to have me with him. So we would do that every week, and I remember that. And he would also go to the prisons and do prison ministry every week, talking to people. He just really believed it, and it was so hard to like it never crossed my mind that he was wrong about this stuff.
Hmm. Can I ask real quick about your grandparents? Did your dad and anyone else in the discussions, did they ever warn you, number one, like, look, they might tell you that Jesus isn't important or whatever, and two, did they ever say like pray for them because they're on their way to hell? Like, did it get that intense?
Yeah, yep. I would pray for them a lot at first, and then as I got to be a teenager, I did start to have these little thoughts like, I don't think they deserve they deserve hell. Or, my brother who, I've witnessed everything he's been through and how it's formed him. And it's, when you're raised in constant trauma, it does things to your brain and the genetics from my mom, like his behavior, he doesn't deserve to be punished for this. If there were some, savior, or, he would need one who's there to help him feel better, not to judge him and say, because you don't believe this and this and this, you deserve punishment. So I would have little glimpses of thoughts like that, but it didn't go too deep. It would just kind of be in the back of my mind as a teenager.
It seemed like for my journey too was very much like you said, the back of your mind, you just you push it aside and you think, this doesn't feel quite right that someone that nice could go to hell. But this is what the Bible says, so it is what it is, and you chalk it up to that. But I think the thing that a lot of us got too is this messaging of God's holiness is so high and elevated. He's so other. He's so different from us down here on the earth in our sin. And if it was like this idea, like if you could see how pure God's holiness is, and someday you will in heaven, but if you could see it, you would look at any sin, including sinful people, and say any punishment he gives is fully deserved. And that theology kind of was the card that wins the game every time. Like God is holy, and if he says no, you really do deserve hell. It's funny how it reframes your mind to think. You think of that person, like that they're a nice person, that they're doing kind things and they're helpful, they're loving, but you kind of reframe their heart as like, you have a wicked, wicked heart. You're deceitful inside. And especially now that you're trying to go against God, because he's clearly giving you this free gift and this path to life, and you're saying, no, I don't want it. All that put together, and you're saying you were already deceitful, but now you're deceitful because you're kind of rejecting God. So you have a wicked heart. And it's amazing how you truly are putting people in boxes, character with their character flaws and their wickedness that have nothing to do with who they really are, but you see them through that filter, and it's so dark.
Yeah, yep. And I've come to see like just how physical the brain is, how kind of our actions and behaviors are determined by our early life experiences, our genetics, and the culture around us, that it just seems so unfair to think that, a God who created us and all of our circumstances can judge us. I feel like it's more of a reflection on himself as a creator,
Yeah,
rather than blaming people for being who they are.
that's true.
And I just felt that because I would see how my family was when they were on their medicine, when they weren't. And my
Mm.
mom, once she got on I think my brother would really like encourage my parents to kind of at least loosen the grip of religion in their life, and get her like to a psychiatrist, like, look, this isn't working. So once, and I think I was a teenager, maybe 15, 16, when she started to get actual help, and it was just like a night and day difference. She was just so much more loving,
Wow.
and I think she wanted to like kind of make it up to us. So she was almost overly, trying to spoil us, and extremely emotionally supportive. And I just love her to pieces, and I respect everything she's been through because she had a really hard life as well. She was given up for adoption because her mother was, was schizophrenic. So she was adopted into a home at like 3 or 4 that was a bad environment. So I just don't see how, you see these people who are going through really rough things, and they're the ones who are, acting out or not believing Jesus, not doing exactly what you're supposed to do to be a good Christian. And just to judge them as, as evil and they deserve to go to hell, it just seems completely unfair.
Yeah.
And I was really put like into my shell when, as a teenager in school and stuff, I was really quiet. I just had I was always thinking about, heaven and hell, and like, this is all what that matters, schooling doesn't matter. Just praying to God. And so I would just and I went to like after school programs. Um, and so I was pretty quiet. It was also like, you have to be submissive and quiet. So I never really, and always waiting on God, like, your thoughts um aren't worth anything. Don't trust your own thoughts. It's evil. So I didn't really like, I didn't feel like assertive or like I could participate in things particularly that well. And it was just like a huge distraction from setting my life up for success, from being able to go to school and find a career, because none of that wasn't my goal. My goal was just to get to heaven constantly,
Mm.
to not go to hell, and make sure my heart's right with God.
Can I ask on that note of the words you mentioned, the word submission? What were the gender roles like in the church and in your home, and how did that relate to what you would, if you had remained Christian, like what you would have expected your home life to be like as a Christian wife and mother?
It was interesting. We definitely taught directly from the Bible, which is pretty clear about wives submit to your husbands. So the men make all the decisions. Even at the church, women are expected to help out just as much, and tithe just as much, but they're not allowed to participate in the decision-making process or to speak. And I just felt like, now I feel like that was completely unfair, but it made sense to me back then. God ordained the men, and then women are below the men. And my dad was not like that. Like he wasn't like the dominating type. So he kind of, despite the Bible, he would, sort of let my mom lead a lot of ways. So at least I got the example of, like, he was very loving, like a loving father and everything. So yeah, that's what was modeled. And then I did have an incident when one of the older boys in the church, when I was like 12 or 13, actually, started to come on to me, and I didn't, took advantage of me and stuff. And I was just completely silent. Like, I just felt like I couldn't speak about it. And that ended up really impacting me. So yeah, I just thought that I couldn't really be proactive or assertive. So I just took it like, okay, this is what God, and it was always about, like, it's the woman's fault, not the man's. So that kind of just
Hmm.
hit me in a way that really hurt my self-esteem, much more, even more so coming from my fragile upbringing and stuff.
I can
Um,
imagine. It's amazing how that meekness message just gets so deep, and it almost, for the women for whom I guess it's arguably easier, if you could put it that way, to be meek and quiet and mild and submissive. They almost seem like in some churches and groups, like that's, they're held up in high esteem. Like that's the ultimate pinnacle, is if you can, of course, dress modestly and be completely wrapped up in the Lord and your walk with the Lord in the church and in ministry. But if you can, in terms of interpersonal relationships, if you can truly be just totally evidencing that you understand that God has created this ranking system, and that you not just obey it, but you actually flourish in it, that you see that the best way to be feminine is to be meek and mild and quiet and submissive, and the best way for a man to be masculine is to be, in leadership and so forth. And then the interaction is for you to just fall under his, their your dad and then your future husband and the church leadership, to fall under their words of counsel and their words of leadership, and just say yes, 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 I love it. And to glorify God through that and say, this is part of my worship, is I say yes to the way God designed it. You get that in your system, and the people for whom that's really easy, those ladies, at least in my circles, were always held up as like this bastion of, oh wow, like if we could just be as holy as she is. And it's amazing. But I think it really, for women who are more, loud and brazen and brash and opinionated, it really puts them in that spot where they're like, I guess I'm not as godly, and I guess I'll never will be, because I want to talk up, speak up, and I want to voice my opinion when I should just be like folding my hands and be quiet. And it really, it's such a, it's a mind job across the board, whether for the women that fit into it and actually do it, which is horrible, or the women that feel like they'll never fit in and they feel like they're always on the outside looking in. It's horrible. It's such a mind job.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's convenient for them. It's nice to have a woman who does everything they want. Goes along with everything they say. Just not having to do half the chores, things like that. So that's how I went into, when I did meet my now he's my ex-husband. But the time I met him, he sort of helped me through a lot of that part of my life, like with my parents. He was Catholic, and so that was a huge deal with my Assemblies of God church. So I actually, I'm told that they had like a big board meeting with all the men gathered together to decide, what I should do. Should I be with this guy, even though he's Catholic? And I remember I was personally struggling with the decision, because that was, I thought I wanted to be with him, but he was Catholic. So I went to like the youth pastor's wife and asked her for her advice. Is it okay would I be unequally yoked? I think that was probably my specific question would I be unequally yoked to marry a Catholic man? And at the time, she gave me like a surprising answer that really resonated with me. She's like, "Oh yeah, that would be fine. I have neighbors who are Catholic and they're great Christians, great people." And usually, for most of the part of my life, like the church would say, any other church, the other denominations don't know about the Holy Spirit properly. Unfortunately, they're not going to make it, to heaven because they don't believe correctly. And so that always sort of sat in the back of my mind too, like, Catholics, do they really deserve to go to hell? Just, they're seeking Jesus. They're like so close, they just don't know about saying the sinner's prayer. And so it felt really good to hear her say that, like, okay, that kind of affirmed my faith, like it's okay. So I kind of went with that idea and felt like it would be okay to marry him. But then the church, after the men had gathered together, and I guess they decided that I shouldn't be with him. So they approached me again, like all the pastors and stuff. And the youth pastor's wife, was right there. And this time she said, they tell me, we think you would be unequally yoked to marry a Catholic man. We don't think this is right for you. And I go, well, this woman here, she told me, I don't want to say her name, but she told me it would be totally fine, that, Catholics are still good people and they're still, loving Jesus and Christian. And she goes, no, I didn't say that. Like, she completely just denied that she ever told me that, and to make it feel like I was making it up. And
Oh, that's two-faced.
yeah. So that was like, that impacted my thoughts about the church. It's, just that she was able to say like such a brazen lie. And then also going back to now, now Catholics do deserve to go to hell. And it's, and then I think I had a more personable conversation with like the actual pastor himself and his wife in private. And they were kind of being a little more real with me. And they said, like, the reason we don't think you should be with him is because we think he's too controlling. He doesn't love you properly. He wants you to become a Catholic rather than, working through a compromise of some sort. And that's what he was saying. His position was, I'm the man. You would have to become Catholic. I'm not going to, compromise on that. So, but that was actually like a little bit of insight. But I think that was really like, despite the Bible, they had that was more like real personable advice. But I was, I felt like I had this hole from like what I went through previously, that I felt like I needed someone to help heal me. I didn't feel like I could heal myself. And so I felt like I did need to marry him. And there wasn't going to be turning back at that point. So I still did. And I went into that marriage.
Did you, when you chatted with him about it privately, or with that husband, did you feel like you did feel confident that he was truly a Christian and then was on his way to heaven?
Yeah, he was, because he was raised really pretty strictly Catholic. Like they went to every Sunday. They went to church every Sunday, and it was so important to her mom, like saying the rosary every day. And he would talk about godly things. So I was able to feel like he was a Christian leader for me. So, and I kind of like the idea that it doesn't have to be my specific brand of religion, God can accept anyone who's seeking him, which was a little bit counter to what I had grown up with, that, even the church down the road, who's slightly different evangelical brands, they're going to go to hell, but but we're still going to worship this God.
Mm. So when you all got married, did it feel like I know a lot of people feel like they go into the dating and courtship phase feeling like you mentioned there's pain, there's angst, there's this sense of like, God, what are you doing? And God, can you bring beauty into my life? Can you create a beautiful family for me? Can you turn the ashes into something beautiful, restore the years the locusts have eaten? Did you feel like God was kind of bringing about a restoration, as it were, of your life through this marriage?
Yeah, I did. And I still think it was healthy for me on one level. He kind of helped me work through a lot of my trauma, and he helped me to move away from my family because I was still running into, abuse at home. And my older brother had become like, he had some manic and paranoia as well, and was starting to get into self-medicating with drugs
Mm.
and stuff. Um, and so he would often be like hounding me to drive him, to the inner city or something. And he just kind of, nobody from the church, my parents, nobody was really able to like keep me safe from all of that.
When you did get married, was it with the understanding that you were going to become a Catholic, or were you all like agreeing to just agree to disagree? We're going to both love Jesus, but in different ways.
Yeah, I was gonna become Catholic, so I even went to like the catechism classes and everything. But in my heart, I approached Catholicism through like the lens of fundamentalist Christianity. So I still was like really close to the Bible and the Holy Spirit, um, and all of that. So yeah, I didn't feel a conflict. I would go to the Sunday services and feel like I had my, moment with the Holy Spirit. But I started to appreciate like the structure and the lack of emotional highs and lows, and just the fact that he was going to be working on his 4-year engineering degree. And to me, like, I think I was about 18 and he was going to go off to college. And I just I couldn't fathom like committing to 4 years of education, because I thought like the most important thing was just praying to God, praying to Jesus. And at one point we even had like we broke up for a little while, because I was so conflicted. I think this was when I was still trying to make peace with becoming Catholic versus evangelical. So we broke up for a period of a few weeks, and I actually went to Florida to attend Bible college.
It's before
It was like,
your marriage.
yeah, before our
Okay.
marriage, yeah. And I think we got married shortly after, but yeah, I went to, because I had this like breaking away, like, oh no, I need, the Holy Spirit. I need to not become Catholic. I can't do that. So I broke up with him, went to this Bible college, and I think I was there for maybe a month or two. But I was going to be like, I don't even know what I was thinking, but I was mostly bred to believe I was going to become like a youth pastor's wife. Like that's what I can't be a youth pastor. I'm not allowed to teach men, but I can be a wife. So I was like bred to, submit to men and serve them or whatever. So I figured I'll just go to this college and maybe I'll meet somebody, I don't know. But I just felt like it was too, as I went, I missed my husband. I felt like it was too like, this is gonna sound weird, like unproductive. Like every day, all we would do is just go and worship for like 3 or 4 hours, and then study the Bible. And and I thought like I was doing the right thing at the time. The Holy Spirit wants me to do this, but just the day-to-day practicality of it felt like, what are we? Am I wasting my time? Like I'm just, why do we? It feels. It just felt like, spending too much time not doing something practical. and I missed my husband really bad. So, or my, at the time, my boyfriend. So I called him, and he came, drove all the way up, and brought me home. Dropped out of Bible college, and then that's when so after I went through all of that, then I was more like aligned with, okay, I do appreciate the structure of the Catholic Church. It's less of the emotional stuff, which is what I needed, and I kind of learned to like focus on the world a little bit more through becoming Catholic. Like, the day to day does matter. So
And so
that
at
was a
this
big process.
in this part of up to this point in the story, you have not seriously questioned the actual worldview as a whole yet at all. Is
Not
that fair
at
to say?
all. Right. I
Apart from
totally
the hell
thought
issue.
God was real and how, yeah, I didn't switch to, the purgatory or whatever. I still believed that it was heaven and hell. Never, yeah, I would have guessed where I was going to end up at the time. And I know like my church people must have been thinking I was already like, lost or whatever because I had chosen to become Catholic instead of
Yeah.
evangelical.
A
But the
lot
truth
a
was,
lot of Christians would have said that, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I guess it didn't register with me at the time, but they must have kind of viewed me already as lost at that point. But I thought I
Mm.
was still, very holy and Christian, and God was totally real. I prayed to him a ton as we were, we got married, and he was like engineer on contract, so we would often move from state to state. So I really clung to God, and we would always find a church to go to each state we were in. And I just remember, I do remember when I started to doubt. We were in Wichita, Kansas. He was on a job there for 6 months or so. I remember walking the dog and just really being impacted by the thought of hell and heaven. Like, I'm like, is there really gonna be hell? Like, these people, is it fair? And I started to feel like it wasn't, just really kind of grew in me that it's not fair that really anyone should go to hell, let alone, my brother who, because he's an atheist and all he's been through. And I really like resonated with my brother. When he was manic, he would go on all the, these, he would really just express himself and what he thinks about things. And I felt like, he was really smart. He was like 5 grades ahead in school. So I really looked up to him, and like he was my person. Like I felt like he understood. He would say things that were just like in the back of my head that I never really thought about consciously. And I was like, I know he doesn't deserve to go to hell, you know.
Mm. It's amazing too how so many of us didn't really give ourselves a permission to ask how we would feel in heaven, knowing our loved ones are burning in hell. Like we were just like, I assume I'll be happy because it says heaven's pure happiness. So I guess I'll be okay with it. But it's like when you really sit back and think about like if there is a heaven and a hell and you're going one place and your loved ones are going somewhere else, the people in heaven are going to have to find a way to be truly happy knowing you're being tortured. And man,
Yeah.
it's a weird thought when you
Yeah.
really let that sink in. I mean, to me, that's enough to start the deconversion process even.
Yeah, it just became so unbelievable. Like, how can you be happy in heaven even when I know others are being tormented like for eternity? So
Mm.
yeah, if our church didn't have that doctrine, I don't know if I would have really gone down the path of deconversion. Possibly. But I was also learning, I was working on my degree in accounting, which had nothing to do with theology or anything like that. But it did teach me that that I can be right. I can think of answers and figure out this stuff, and I can have valuable thoughts, which was just like a weird revelation to me. I never really thought that I could, and I could impact like the real world objectively. Whereas before it was always spiritual in the spiritual realm. So I started to, and like sometimes I would even correct my teachers, like if they might grade something wrong, and I would point it out, and they would say, "Oh yeah, you're right." And that was just like huge for like, wow, I can be right while other people are wrong. And that coupled with thinking about, heaven and hell in Wichita, Kansas, I just started to, that's when I launched myself into like this full blown, like, okay, now I'm in a deconstruction mode. I need to figure out if this is true or not. I'm going to be having kids someday. And I think it even crossed my mind, like, if I have kids and they have even a chance of going to hell, isn't that unethical? So I was just really like, I need to make sure that I'm teaching them the right thing.
Mm.
So I launched into like 4 months of just digging into every question I could think of, any doubt I had. But I did not allow myself to read or look at any source that was not Christian. So this process, because I thought they might, deceive me or influence me too much. There might be room for like bias or emotion. So I only through reading Christian sources like the Bible, C.S. Lewis, and Case for Christ, Lee Strobel, all of
Mm.
that. Just trying to. There was one by Francis Collins I read, but one of the main questions I had was why did the Jews not accept Jesus as their savior? I started to realize there's two sides to every story through my accounting degree. Like, information is only as good as its source, and is often unintuitive. The right answer is often unintuitive. So you have to like verify, is this right? You need like the evidence. And if the evidence isn't there, then you don't believe it as strongly. You don't put as much weight into it. And it really came through this process to me that we were putting way too much weight on the Bible versus the evidence that was there. Um,
Mm. That's so awesome.
yeah, yeah. Like one of the key intellectual reasons that helped me to hold on to Christianity was, the New Testament fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. So I questioned that. I picked at that. I'm like, it's like, why do I believe this? And that came up. So I was like, so I really investigated what the Old Testament prophecies were and the fulfillment of it in the New Testament. And I just saw, like, I was so disappointed. I was like, wait, none of these require anything supernatural, considering the people writing the New Testament read and studied daily, probably the Old Testament. And a lot of them were just like weird ways of making it happen because that's what it says in the Old Testament, or just something so broad and vague that it's just completely unimpressive, or like it wasn't even a prophecy to begin with. Like the New Testament author would just be like, take some random verse and say and extrapolate that and act like it was a prophecy that was now fulfilled. So I was just
Mm.
really objectively like not convinced of like, I can't believe, people are saying that this is hard evidence for God. And then also, like, I think the Bible says, Jesus says, you will know I'm the Son of God based on the signs and miracles I perform. And I was like, okay, that makes sense to the people who lived in that time and saw the signs and miracles. But that's not evidence like for us, 2000 years later. So that I
Mm.
really just got to be able to see through these things now that I was able to trust my thoughts and be proactive about it. And I
You're
just
really
realized,
attacking some big subjects here. That's awesome. I don't even think I dealt with some of those in my deconversion. You're attacking some of the hardcore bastions of who Jesus is, and yeah, that's awesome. I think I just add real quick this one note. I think the thing that's amazing too to me in this process is to realize that we didn't really have what I like to call a scope for the imagination to imagine that all these prophecies they may they may at first glance have been like, well, it doesn't line up perfectly. It's a stretch, but Jesus kind of fulfills them. But to realize that they literally created the Jesus character, taking verses, yes, out of context, but they were pulling all these things to just create him in the first place, and to say, in a sense, they kind of he does fulfill the prophecy in the sense that this author wanted to craft this story, but there's
Yeah.
no actual real fulfillment there because it's just a made up story. And to me, those kinds of concepts were what helped me to really step back from the edge and think, wait a second, there's a much bigger picture here. They took these verses and crafted these stories. This is literally like a fictional story. Just like, I mean, we love our superheroes. We love the Avengers and all that. We love these guys. And everybody's loved them. The Greeks had these massive stories, and the Romans stories of these great conquerors and these great demigods who could do amazing things. But we would all say they're all made up, or at least they're, even if they're based on some person in history, the great fanciful things that they did that are clearly way supernatural, they're clearly legendary and made up. They're fiction. And to step back and say, well, maybe the authors of this book, the New Testament, the Gospels specifically in Acts, that they were crafting a fictional story based on these earlier texts. And especially when you start to realize the mimesis, the copying, where they're taking the David character and making Jesus like the new David. He's the new Moses. He's the new Joshua. He's the new Israel. He's the new Adam, according to Paul. He's just the new everything. And you realize, oh, so you're taking Old Testament stories and Old Testament verses out of context, and you're creating a character, creating stories, creating quote unquote prophecies. It's all just fabrication. And when I realized that was, I mean, before I concluded that, when I just realized that was at least a possibility, like it might be possible that this is a crafted story, purely crafted by a guy in his head. Once you at least admit that's a possibility, doesn't mean you necessarily land there right away. But say that could be what's happening here. It's like, oh shoot, and the dominoes start to fall eventually.
Yeah, it was just like it doesn't actually require anything supernatural, and I previously had thought that in order for that, like the text required something supernatural in order to have the fulfillment of those prophecies. And then I saw like the contradictions in the gospel accounts, and I was like, well, if there's contradictions, that means one part isn't true and one part is true. And then all these other stories where we only have one telling of it, how do we know which parts of that are true and not true? And I think it's easier to crack when you believe the Bible is inerrant. And so it was like,
Yeah.
it kind of tumbled down, and then of course, like the immoral parts of the Bible. I also wrestled a lot with the Noah's flood, like that being believable. And I was only looking at Christian sources still. And I came to the conclusion, oh, it must have been this, local flood. So I held that for a while. And
You're on the slippery slope. I can hear it. The
yeah,
inerrancy's gone. The stories might be fantastical. You're on the slippery slope.
yeah.
the
And then
the devil's got you at that point. Were you afraid of that process? Like, were you afraid that you might be deconverting? Did you have the foresight to think, where is this leading? This might lead me to be an agnostic or an atheist, or at least a very liberal Christian horror of ours. Like, were you foreseeing that, or were you just like, was it just saying, I don't know where this leads, but this doesn't make sense?
I think I was afraid, but I was also just like so excited, like into it, like, oh my gosh, it's so like interesting seeing the Bible actually like have little asterisks saying, oh, that we believe this was a later edition. That like blew my mind. Like, how can this be? I think it was like the end of Mark or something. It was later edition, like the gospel account.
Mm.
And so that blew my mind. That really weakened my belief. And then like, oh yeah, the zombie Jesus, or the zombie account where like all the people, where only one of the gospels says that like everybody rose from their graves and there were zombies walking around the earth.
Yeah.
That one really really got me. I'm like, oh, and they only say that in one of the four. So
And they
but I was
probably
still
like
just like,
coincided with when the Walking Dead shows were just coming out, right?
yeah, yeah. I'm like, why would they say there's only one and there's no other accounts of that happening? And so I was still in just that information gathering. I don't think I was judging myself too much yet, like, oh, you're bad, it was in the back of my mind, but I was just so like interested in learning more about the Bible and how it was put together.
Yeah.
So this was a few months, and then I'd been wrestling with the thought, and I'm like, I don't know if I believe it. And then there was one night, um, I was just kind of like sitting with all this new information, and I got a call from somebody who was the wife of somebody who was really close to me in the church. And she told me that that she actually caught her husband cheating but he was also at the same time teaching a course on infidelity at the church. Um, and
Lovely.
this person just was close enough to me that hypocrisy, like somebody I looked up to, and I really thought like they were the ideal Christian, and like that person really believes it. It just felt like, well, they must not believe it or not be taking it seriously or something to be able to do that. And for some reason, I can't explain exactly the psychology, but I was just able at that moment to just let go of it all and just be like, intellectually, I don't believe it. In my heart, it feels like it's not true. It doesn't coincide with my morals. Now that I was able to like think about my own moral values, and I did wrestle with, well, maybe there's an evil God. What's to say there's not, this evil God? Like all of this is true, even if I find it, unfair, unjust.
Mm.
I just thought like, well, if there is a God who created me, like he created my moral values, everything. If there's moral values instilled in me, then he instilled it. And it just didn't make sense why he would instill me with morals that are contradictory to what he does, to his behavior. If he wants to have a relationship with me, then he would be in the right, he would behave in a way that I saw morally good, at least.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so I didn't really, fortunately, I didn't get too stuck on thinking maybe there's an evil God. And then for him to say he's just, like, to me, justice is not, I created you, I set up all your life circumstances, and now I'm going to judge you as bad and evil and send you for eternal punishment. Like, to me, that's, injustice. That's what we need to be saved from. Just because he simply didn't believe a story that I'm now realizing has very weak evidence,
Mm.
and that he had that flaw of thinking and saying that he didn't understand that his miracles and signs that he performed 2,000 years ago is not evidence for us now. Like it just seemed like a man-made idea, fallible
Mm.
thought. So I didn't really see it as coming from God anymore. I didn't see the Bible as written by God by any means.
Mm.
And now
I,
we
f-
just kind of, yeah.
I feel like, do you know, I'm just gonna use a quick metaphor. Like when you see those in movies or a show where there's like a military training range where they're testing out weapons and they're out in the middle of the desert somewhere where they can't do any damage, but they can fire these things and see if they blow things up the way they hope they do. It almost feels like you were taking a bazooka to like the 10 biggest targets of like Christianity and you just like blowing them out of the water. I mean, that is awesome. I mean, that to go to the depths on all those, that wide range of topics of the inerrancy of scripture, the goodness of God, and all the other things you talked about. It's like these are critical topics, and heaven, hell, etc. When you start to really take these out, and then I think you said the word Pandora's box, but like the idea that once you take those big ones out, you realize that there might still be another 100 issues on the table. But once some start to fall, you're like, it's like you get a primer, you get a way to figure out how to figure out if that's right or wrong. Okay, I figured out how to determine if that makes sense. And no, it definitely doesn't. You're only focused on the first 10 big ones at first, but then you're like, you've now got a structure for how to analyze the rest. And you're like, I can just take a quick glance and I can pretty much guess that those are all going to fall too. It's amazing how it works. I love it. And I was going to say too about the bad, God being an evil God. I say to my kids a lot, if Yahweh were real and sin were a real thing, he would be the worst sinner of all time. And if anyone needed salvation, he would need it. And they understand why I say that, because he's, like you said, with the flood, he's the biggest mass murderer of all times. He's a liar. He talks about, he sends lying spirits. He commands genocide and land theft and stoning and child brides. Like, this is a wicked, wicked character. He tells his own people, says, if you disobey me, I'm going to take you in front of your enemies, and I'm going to lift up your skirt and show them your nakedness, just to shame you, put you to shame. I'm going to punish you so badly that you're going to be so hungry you're going to eat your own children. Like, that's what I'm going to do to you. It's like, this is not like, if there's a sinner in this situation, it's Yahweh. And if there's someone that needs saving, it's him. It's
Yeah.
crazy once you realize what's really going on.
Yeah, just the term quick to anger, that was supposed to be like a big sin, but that's exactly how I would describe how God acted. If you're tethered to the Bible, some of these versions of Christianity are, becoming looser and looser away from the Bible. But to me, it's still, that's what the religion was built on. It always comes down to this Bible. So if there's, horrible, contradictory things in it, then just Christianity, why hold on to any Christianity at all? Because it was the objective source of truth in my mind. And, and if God really wrote it, then he's responsible for the communication of it and how people understand it. So even the fact that it could be misinterpreted so badly, reflects bad on God. It was just like a really wild time, like just a wild ride to go through that.
Did you have anyone you could talk to through that process? Your husband or anybody?
I would talk to my husband a little bit about it, about evolution. I think he was on board with evolution, which was because being Catholic. So I could talk to him a little bit about it. My dad, I would still talk to him about it, even though he really believed. But then, so I remember when the moment I got off the phone, it was shortly after I realized, I can officially say, drop all of this and just say, I don't believe it on an emotional level or intellectual level or anything. And I'm like, how am I going to tell my husband that, he knew about a lot of my questions and he would sort of like entertain them or whatever. But I was never to give up on Jesus. That was really what he was raised from birth with, very steadily belief in Jesus. So I'm like, well, I'm going to bring him out to dinner and let him know we're going to go out to dinner. We went out to Texas Roadhouse out in Kansas, and I was prepared to let him know. And I just told him, like, I don't think any of this is true anymore. Like, I don't think Jesus rose from the dead, or at least there's just not enough evidence for me to put any like stock in it. And he just really, it hit him really hard. Like, he didn't entertain me at all, like thinking, maybe I'm right. Or he went to this, like, I have to work, I have to focus on my career. So I just listened to the authority on what's true. And he had been, bred to believe, a woman is not, the authority. So I'm going to take the word of, it was always like white older men, like Catholic priests or some friends he had. And they all say, no, Jesus died on the cross. You have to be right with him. And so there was a lot of back and forth, like, well, just hear me out. Like, aside from them, like just from the logic, like you can break away from this. Like, it's just really not true. But he would not, he wouldn't go with me there. And he actually I decided to say that I believed, I must have mentioned the word science, through like explaining that I now believe in evolution. And oh wait, I think yes. And and his question to me was, so are you now a Scientologist? So that's just like to the level he wasn't willing to understand, it's just shut that out. I have to believe. And his
Very
defense was a
typical,
lot
but
of
very
fear.
sad.
Yeah, like he would have been, pay probably a lot of consequences if he didn't believe, like from his family, and just the built-in psychological traps of Christianity that are meant to keep you in the fold.
Yeah.
And one is when somebody starts to turn away, they're evil, they're filthy rags, so you listen to them less and less. So he would listen to me less and less. And he thought at one point he was afraid that I was even demon possessed because I had been, turning away from Jesus. And I remember him just breaking down crying, like, I miss the old you who was, more submissive and not questioning things or whatnot. I wasn't sure if we were gonna work it out, but I told him I wanted to go to counseling. I just felt like he couldn't see me for who I am. It was always, God through the lens of Christianity. And I was like, well, I want to have like a real relationship. I want you to look into this because it's so important to me. But he just wouldn't, and he said, we have to go to, he's like, okay, I'll go to counseling, but it has to be a priest. It has to be a Catholic counselor. So I entertained him on that, and we went to talk to a Catholic priest regularly. And I had some interesting conversations with him. I didn't hold back. I just told him this Bible's not true. And, I don't believe any of this anymore. And I gave him some of my reasons, and he just looked at me and said, it's like, yeah, with Catholicism, we have a lot more room to like interpret it more metaphorical. I don't really have too much of a problem with things you're saying. But when it comes down to Jesus rising from the dead, he said, that is the true myth. This is the one myth that is true. And he was really emotional. Like he actually started crying as saying that. And I'm like, okay, I'm not really going to get anywhere with this.
Wow.
And then I found out, that and then I found out my husband had actually been calling him ahead of time to tell him to kind of give him insight into what I was thinking, to try to tell him what to tell me, to try to get me back. Because, his goal was for me to come back to being like the submissive, compliant Christian wife. And he loved that verse about submit to your husband. He would bring that up. But I just wasn't going to be doing that anymore because I realized I had so little control over my life, just every decision was made by him. And I was always like frozen, waiting for God to tell me what to do. And once I broke the reins of that, I just felt so much better. Like I can decide what I want. I can take steps towards it. I can do things that affect the real world and not just living in the spiritual realm. So we did end up, oh yeah, he got so untrusting of me since I had turned against Jesus that he took all of our resources and put it into accounts under only his name. So I had no means to money or anything, even though, I had been working as well. And I told him, I looked him in the eye and I said, if you don't move at least half back, this is going to be the beginning of the end. And he just said, nope, I'm not going to do it, and he refused. I said, I'm going to give you, 3 days. And, at this point, we were living in South Carolina. And it came to that day and he just refused. I know he called like all of his, old advisors, and they said, she has to comply with you, don't give in, or, that'll be trouble or whatever. I'll be a quarrelsome wife. So I could not, I just was calling for him to see me, to love me for who I am, aside from all this, brainwashing and stuff. And we just couldn't get there. And fortunately, we didn't have kids yet. And I knew, so it was like the right time for me to leave. So on the third day, when he wouldn't move over the money, I felt like it was being too controlling, and I just felt like I was so excited to be able to make my own decisions and take back my life. So I packed up the car, put my dog in the car, and I still remember, like, this is your last chance. Are you going to move it over? And he says no. And then I just drove off, 13-hour or whatever hour drive all the way back to Rochester, to my parents' house. And so that was that. And then, yeah.
Just gotta say it's so sad, but it's typical, but it's so sad they have to love Jesus more than, I mean, the Bible's clear, like you have to love Jesus more than your mother, father, brothers, sisters, husband, wives, your property. Like Jesus always comes first. He always comes first. And that is such a destructive concept. I mean, and just as you're just painting this picture, I'm just thinking, like, how bizarre and horrible is it to look at someone that you've professed your love for, and to say, I hear you saying you're thinking more clearly than ever, at least in your mind. You're gaining your voice and your autonomy more than ever. You're more aware of your surroundings and your environment. You've studied more than ever. You've thought through this more than ever. You're more educated than ever, and you're more profoundly intentional about your choices than ever. Like, you're picking your path and your life and your personality. You're arguably more in touch with your own heart and body and emotions and spirit than ever before in your life. And
Yeah.
someone to look at such healthy choices and say, stop it, or we're done. Like this is horrible. And like what? Like as if the choices you were making were somehow bad or even abusive. And it's like, what in the world, what kind of upside down world is it where you choose all those healthy things and you're reprimanded and ostracized for it? It's so weird, but that is exactly the upside down world that Christianity puts Christians in. They cannot see up from down anymore. And to take a marriage that otherwise could have, I would imagine, could have worked out and could have been beautiful, to just throw it all away over your love for a mythological character from 2000 to 6,000 years ago. Like, that's insane. That's insane. But they'll do it. They'll do it because this indoctrination is so profound.
It's so deep. In my church, like, the retention rate is huge. I think I'm one of maybe two people who I know of out of 400 that like officially deconverted. And then my brother, later after he actually passed away later after
So sorry.
the divorce. Thank you. Yeah. And I just remember his funeral. They made it so much about just Jesus, like who he was didn't mean hardly anything. What, his personality, what he really thought. It was just so sad that they detracted from his character, and just he only mattered to the extent that, this one day it seemed like maybe he believed a little bit in Jesus, even though I know he was an atheist, like pretty much through and through.
Yeah.
So that was really disappointing. And then even like as a teenager, the pastors were advising my dad to disown him because he didn't believe. And I'm like, how the fuck do you stop providing for your own children just because they don't believe the same silly story without much that doesn't have evidence? And they would even admit, like, yeah, there's not evidence. We believe by faith. It's like, okay, so if you're going to believe it by faith, then don't put so much weight on it. Don't withdraw love from people, from your children, just because they don't believe it. They don't have faith too. Don't teach young children, that they deserve to be tortured for eternity. Put less stock in it. Treat it for what evidence it is. When you teach your kids, tell them, we've decided to believe this, not it's 100% the truth and reality, which is how it was taught to me by every adult that I came into contact with. Told me, other than my grandma and grandpa, told me that it was 100% true. So you don't really doubt that until you get older. And it's kind of interesting that I actually deconverted when I was 26, which is when your brain is supposed to be actually fully developed, fully formed. So it took all that time for me to like get myself together and like actually be able to think about it through my own lens. And I had to be separated from my church and, the strong emotional pull. And even my parents, I was out in Kansas and they would think of it as like such a sad story, don't, that's why you have to stay at the church, you have to come in for your brainwashing every 3 days.
Yeah, basically. Uh,
Yeah.
well, I was curious as you were at the point of the deconversion, where you're like, yes, I'm definitely out and making it a little bit more public to your close loved ones. What was going through your head in terms of the emotional trauma of like, I've I've been expecting heaven all this time, and who knows?
Mhm.
And I was expecting to see this loved one, and now who knows? And just even more basically, like God was kind of like present in our minds. It wasn't like we were constantly convincing ourselves, I think you're there, God, but maybe you're not. I think you're there, but maybe not. Like we just knew he was there. It was like, I love that idea in the Matrix where the first one where Neo is first shot, he's shot a few times in the chest and the agents think they've won the day, and then he stands back up. But when Neo stands back up, for the first time ever, the Matrix no longer looks like this movie thing. It looks like the code, the green code. So like he sees everything behind it. And it was kind of like that for us with God. Like we just saw, like you didn't need necessarily all these miracles and wonderful things to happen or a voice from heaven. You just saw God's handiwork and his hand everywhere. You knew he was involved in creating you in the universe and in holding everything together. And in anything that good, of course, was, that happens in life was because of him. Anything bad that happens was him disciplining you to bring you back to a submissive role. You just saw him in everything in your life. And then to suddenly say, this loving, wonderful father that's brilliant beyond brilliant, and I can't wait to see his face someday. He's never been there? Like, are you kidding me? Like, how did you deal with that whole incredible levels of loss of this?
Yeah, that was really tough at first, like devastating. For the first year of my deconversion, I was just in tears every day. I was shaky, just I didn't know how to be in the world without this. My whole structure was pulled out from under me. But eventually I kind of came to the realization, like, I really did have those feelings. I really felt love. I really felt presence. And I just realized like that was real, even if God isn't real. And I just sort of attributed it to like my subconscious or my higher self, my inner self, part of me, that love was there and that presence was always still there. Um, and I even tell myself like I used to tell myself this as a Christian, his mercies are new every day, and that would be like such a good feeling for the morning. But I still like tell myself that like mercies are new every day, and it just means something different to me now. It just means like for some reason I have this great gift of being alive and being conscious and experiencing what's real, and I'm just going to experience it, the best I can, and try not to let what happened in the past, cloud it. Just let it be a new mercies every day. Um, so
Hmm.
yeah, I'm able to like kind of bring up a lot of those same, because I don't want to lose the good things, I don't want to lose the love and the presence that I told myself was God. So I still feel it like with meditation or just enjoying different movies or going for a walk or listening to music, anything, And I just
Hmm.
love that I have no boundaries now as far as like learning and obtaining information, and my brain is the only tool I have. Like this was my tool for survival, and they had effectively cut it off from me for 26 years. I didn't have access to it. I was just passive and waiting on the Holy Spirit and trusting, mentors, what they say. But now I feel like I can go out on a limb. I can trust my thoughts. I can decide what I want to do and try it and test the waters. I'll mess up a lot, but I know it's my own story. I know that I chose to do it. And at the end, it's going to feel good to know that I really tried to reach my potential. And I just love like understanding the way things are, like through reading and learning. So I do a lot of that and just, and I love listening to like other people too, like hearing their deconversion stories just means a lot to me because I just relate to it so much. But yeah.
I love how you're describing that. That's so cool. And I can definitely relate. It feels like in some ways, even though we wouldn't like be reframing it in some woo-woo sense of like, I think I'm God. Like we know that there's not a God and we know we're not it. But at the same sense, there is this feeling of, yeah, again, you don't want to go too far with this because you don't want to make it feel like the world's some big, Star Wars force, but just it feels like there's something mysterious about the universe. It feels like there's something transcendent, and it's probably just the chemicals in our brain. But at the same time, when you're out in nature and you see the beautiful sunrise or sunset, or you see something really important, like you see the birth of a baby, or you go to even if a funeral, you certainly just sometimes just something just your kids just come up and give you the biggest hug, and they you think it's going to be like a 2-second hug, and they just hold on to you for 30 seconds. They just want to hug you and hug you. All these little transcendent experiences, it's like that kind of becomes your chapel, that becomes your sanctuary or your temple. And you realize like, and it all mixes together, like my ability to perceive art and to make it, perceive poetry and to make it, to enjoy songs and to create them, to be loving and to be loved. All this stuff, it becomes your act of worship, as it were, to this temple. That's just like, I want my temple to be a temple of peace in my own mind and heart, and I want to create beauty everywhere, not because there's a God and not because I think I'm a God, but just because this life is so short, and I want to leave it. I want to be one of the people that helps other people, and I want to be coming alongside and creating moments of beauty that just take your breath away. And that becomes, as it were, your new sanctuary, to have that mentality, and then to go out into the world and just I know people get triggered by the word blessing, but if I can redeem it, just to bless people's socks off with how much beauty and love you're going to give them. And it's amazing how that ends up becoming so much more peaceful and beautiful than Christianity's beauty and peace ever could have been,
Right. And it's dependable, it's, if we help each other, there's going to be sometimes, someone's feeling low and they need someone else who's feeling all the things you described, and they can help lift them up. And we just help each other. That's what we really need to be doing, instead of building this fake construct that, pretend that ultimately is going to fail you, because it's really no better than chance. You're really just always propping up the idea of there being a God who's there for you in your mind. And that takes a lot of effort, rather than just let go and accept what is, and truly help each other. And like how the church treated LGBT people and things like that, it's just, it tells you, how you were born is wrong. And I felt like, we need to help each other feel right. We save each other sort of, rather than there being some external savior, and we save ourselves as well with the help of loved ones, just doing the best we can.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I know we've covered a lot here. I did have a few quick final questions, and then we can get through this quickly as we usually do. And then if you want to, bring up anything else in your story that we didn't get to, that you forgot, that maybe these questions will bring up for you. But I was just curious. You mentioned, of course, that you've got your two beautiful children. How do you reframe parenting from your vantage point now, knowing, number one, how much trauma was put on your childhood, specifically, not just from the medical stuff with your mom, but specifically from the church and the Christian worldview, How have you shifted? Like, what messaging are you leaving behind that you're never going to give them? What messaging are you replacing it with? How do you parent as a deconverted Christian?
I think this really shows how, like, instinctively, I just really don't believe it because my instinct is just to protect them from it, to shield them. I completely shield them from, for now, while they have like such young minds, I shield them from those drastic psychological traps of Christianity, like Jesus died for you, you're evil if you don't believe. So they really just don't know much of anything about it. Um, they have encountered like Christians at school. And I talked to her about me and my partner. My partner feels the same way. He's like, agnostic, and he'll tell her like it's not true. It's just we frame it as mythology, like it's Christian mythology. And it really, as you tell them, as you try to describe it, it sounds like mythology, like God, there's heaven and hell, it really fits. And she's like, okay, it's mythology. But some people believe it's true. And, but we trust, science and what we can observe, because, anybody can write a book and say it was written by God, but nobody can forge the universe, so what we learn through observing the universe is what we can put more weight in, what's more true. So yeah, she believes a lot in science. She loves doing experiments and learning new things, reading. And I tell her to be proud of herself. She's like, I tell her, what do you think about that? I try to get her to be introspective and like her thoughts matter. How do I feel in this moment, rather than it always shifting extra. How you feel is bad and irrelevant, not being in tune to yourself. So I try to impart that into them. And but I just love that they're like that they don't have to go through all of the whole process that I went through, even though it is my journey, and I'm proud of it. Like, who knows where I would have ended up if I hadn't gone through it, or what good pieces of wisdom I've learned going through it. I'm just trying to impart it into them so that they can, take off from all the benefit of the wisdom I've accumulated, and then add it to themselves or correct it as they want to. So
Mm,
yeah, just trying to give them confidence in themselves more, and in science and observing things.
that's
Um,
awesome. It seems like for so many of us, we struggle at first to get plugged into community, but eventually we find it, either with online or somehow, and we kind of feel lost. You talked about it for like for your first year was a hard year for you, but you do eventually get grounded in your own heart, and you get connected in some ways with people, or you just learn to be so self-sufficient that the connections don't matter as much. But whatever, over time, you eventually get past what some of us call the angry atheist phase, where you're just like, gosh darn it, I was so deceived. I should have known better. A God who commands genocide. Like, how in the world did I let that pass as okay for this long? But you get past being angry at yourself and angry at your pastors. You just like, it is what it is. It happened. And you kind of get into a new normal. But eventually you do become hyper aware that there's other people who, even though you've taken this journey, you've gotten quite a few steps past it, there's other people that are on step one. Like, say you're on step 5,000, they're on step one, and they're about to, it's for them, the shit's about to hit the fan really hard. How do you feel like your personality and your talents, your creativity, your interests, how do you feel like that is inspiring you to, as I like to say, leave the planet better than you found it, but to make a difference for all those people around you besides just your immediate nuclear family, but to say, I want to make a difference in the world, but this is how I'm particularly skilled at making a difference and making an impact.
I love the idea of just loosening the grip of religion for people. I've been working on my mom a lot, and I think she's just like in a much healthier place now. Like, I'm the only me, my brother passed away, and but so now it's just me telling her, it wasn't your fault. It's not because of your sin that you have to take psychiatric medicine and you went through all of this. and she's gotten better and better. And she's actually looked at me and said, I think you might be right, but I want to keep things good with your father, because it's so important to him. But I've also loosened the grip for him. He's gone to a different denomination that's much less radical, as far and so he went to like a Lutheran church now. But yeah,
It's a big step.
it's just so like in me, that in every instinct I have, that I want to prevent this from happening to other people. I want people, because if you just keep trusting Jesus, especially in important matters, it can really mess up your life, or if not yours, then tangentially somebody else's life that you're impacting. Like somebody's son or daughter who might come out of the closet or something. I think it's important to believe what's true as much as possible, so that we can make better decisions in how we treat others and how we make decisions for our own lives. And I would hate to live this life and gloss over it, thinking it's evil and wicked, and always be thinking about the afterlife and pleasing somebody else, but only to realize that this was all I had. This was, the miracle was this life. So I just like to help people. I just want to make them feel like it's okay to question. You don't have to believe something that doesn't make sense to you. Like somebody said that to me, and it was so important. Like, you don't have to believe it if it doesn't make sense to you. You have the authority to say, well, I don't need to entertain that thought. I don't like it. It doesn't make sense to reality, to my experience of reality. So yeah, I would love to just be able to help other people come out of it, and I do it a lot. I'm sort of like putting myself out there as the black sheep of the community that I grew up in. Now that I'm back in Rochester, like, I'll be the one to say, I don't believe in Jesus, and it helps other people. And I kind of see it like they feel like they can, they don't have to toe the line perfectly, the Christian line as perfectly, because, I'm sort of setting the example. And they can even to the point they admit, hurts from the church and stuff. So, but yeah, just for me, it was just immense coming to the other side. Like, when I think of where I would have been if I stayed Christian and in that mindset, I was so just unempowered and just waiting, just always waiting for something to tell me I have permission to act. Whereas now, I can decide, how do I want my life to go, and I can take steps to make it happen. So for me, it's been tremendous, but also like very bittersweet too, because of losing the relationships, and that's been significant, like just really like grieving the loss of the relationships I had, and trying to understand why they did what they did, why they still believe what they believe, why they're voting for Trump, why they're, just trying to understand their mindset in a way that, that makes sense to me. And then thinking about how they view me, which is probably, is like a worthless sinner and stuff. That's all like so hard to swallow, but it's just part of the package. But overall, I feel like it's just been, it's been worth it. And now I'm just reaching out to people who are more my people now, who have like graduated from Christianity, from this mindset, and just working on that now.
Yeah.
And
That's so awesome.
yeah.
And those conversations, they add up, they make a big difference. And you never know too, just the fact that some people may have never really had a really nice person in their lives that's an atheist or an agnostic. For you to be there as a kind person, a loving person, available to help them, raising a healthy family, and to think, oh, God didn't strike her dead for leaving the church. Like, she's just living a nice, healthy life. That presence alone is such a big contrast to, I mean, so many of us had the well poisoned so bad. It was like, if you leave the church, like, God's going to strike you dead, or else you're just going to have demons around you. It's like, no, my life's gotten more peaceful and more beautiful, and I'm doing just fine. Thank you. That kind of stuff. And for people to realize, okay, so you can walk away from Christ. And I know they always are thinking in the back of their heads, God's still going to get her in the afterlife for sure. But,
Yeah.
at least to say for what you can see now for this life, to say, oh, her life is fine. Her family's beautiful. They're healthy. They're maybe arguably healthier than our Christian family. Why is that? Those things really do add up, especially again for the people that are hyper insulated and they don't know nice atheist people, because they're told that, they're so demonic and they're going to take away your faith. Well, I just want to say I appreciate so much your sharing your story today. Was there anything else that we didn't get to that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, I just really appreciate it. I feel like being able to share my message gives meaning to all the suffering that I went that me and my brothers went through, and just so I really appreciate it. If anyone can learn or get information from it, that's great. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing the way that these work. People share their stories, and like we've all heard many times, your story can become someone else's survival manual, and it's so critical. So I love to encourage people. I do it different ways, but since you mentioned it that way, I'll just say too, for anyone else that's watching, if you are ready to share your story, please be inspired by what Becca shared with us. There are reasons to speak up. There's reasons to wait. There's some people that need to wait a little bit, but when the time is right and you're safe and you can do it, speak up, because other people can be so empowered. And I feel like that's one of the things I'm picking up from your story is you were really like reclaiming your autonomy, your power, taking your power back, obviously getting out of patriarchy and misogyny. A lot is part of that, but just reclaiming your own voice and being able to say, like you said, if something doesn't sound right, it's okay to say, I don't have to believe it. If there's not evidence enough yet for it, I don't have to believe it. I might someday, but today's not the day. That's so powerful. And so many of us were like threatened, like you don't question the narrative, and if you do, you're a bad person, yada yada. And it's just to give yourself that freedom to say, no, I'm brave enough and I'm powerful enough. I'm not afraid anymore. It's okay to question. It's okay to not believe if I don't have a reason to. It's truly it's just such a beautiful thing. And I appreciate that I see it woven into your story in many ways, and it's awesome. I hope to give my kids that power too, just to say, like, I like to tell my kids, I'll say to them in the car, like, who has the power over what you believe? And they always say, I do, meaning them. And I'll be like, do you need to believe like mommy or daddy or this person? I'm like, no. Do you have to be an atheist? No, we don't have to be. I'm like, you get to pick the path you want. And I often will do this picture where I'll pretend there's like a bubble around their head, like a space is like a glass helmet, or like an actual bubble that you'd blow up or something you could put your hand through. And I'll be like, I'm going to pretend I want to change your mind. And I'll say, you have the power to push my hand away. Like, no. And I'll literally say the words, I'm going to change your mind to make you think like me. And like, no. And just practicing that, saying, you can push my thoughts away. You don't have to believe like daddy. And, you give people that power. Amazing things happen. It's so beautiful.
Such a basic human right that we need, to
Yeah.
choose to be able to believe what we believe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And to reject things that don't make sense. Well, this has been awesome. I feel like we could go on more, but I'd love to do a follow-up at some point. If you can, at some point have a topic on your mind, we can revisit your story or some kind of topical presentation. But for now, I'll just say thank you so much for sharing your story. Becca, this has been great to hear you and get to know you. So everyone, we've been speaking with Becca Yeoman. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Becca Yeoman, thank you so much. Great to get to know you. Appreciate your time today.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.